causes of the American Revolution. As you recall from our previous lecture, the French and Indian War might have been the genesis of the American Revolution. After the war, Britain had to pay for it, and they figured, well, since it's on American soil, let's make the colonists pay for it. And so they put in some unpopular regulations. And you can see here the Proclamation Act of 1763, the Sugar Act of 64, the Quartering Act of 65, and the Stamp Act of 65 also. The Quartering Act required colonists to house and feed British soldiers. Definitely, I don't think anybody would want, even this day and age, to house and feed soldiers from essentially another country in your own house. The Stamp Act was really the first direct tax levied against the colonies. All printed materials were now taxed. So, Britain was digging themselves a hole, and then we'll see where it goes to. The Townshend Acts of 1767 created new higher tariffs, and again, a tariff is a tax on glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. The kicker on this, though, is that custom officers were also given the right to arrest and execute smugglers. And, no trial by no jury of your peers, just a one person could, to try you and could execute you. Well, as you would happen, the colonists were not happy about this and were protesting, and what ended up happening on March 5th, 1770, the Boston Massacre occurred. And 5 colonists were killed during this. Again, you look at different scenarios here. The British claim somebody fired upon the British troops. The Americans claim that the British just fired into an unarmed mob. Who knows what really happened. But the British did repeal all the Townshend Act taxes except for the tea tax. I had the opportunity a few years ago when I did the Boston Marathon to go to all these places in Boston. And it's kind of cool to go to the actual spots where the Boston Massacre took place, and a lot of other the revolutionary activities took place. The Townshend Acts of 1767 were repealed in 1770. After the Boston Massacre, the British really thought, we got really created a mess on our hands, so they did repeal a lot of these. But they did not repeal the tea tax, and tea was an integral part of the British society. Like we drink coffee, they drink tea. Well, the tariff actually made tea less expensive, but the colonists didn't care at this time. Their dander was up, and at this point, they didn't want to listen to anything the British or the British monarchy or the crown, if you will, had to say. So the British kept the tax on December 16th of 73. A bunch of colonists dressed up as Native Americans, and again, I don't think they really fooled anybody. Dumped a whole bunch of tea into the Boston Harbor, and Britain, the Crown again, would not stand for this, so they sent about 2,500 troops to Boston, and this just made the Bostonians irate. And you had the Intolerable Acts, the Coercive Act of 74. Now you banned the local government. You got to remember, up to this time, the colonists pretty much governed themselves. Granted more power to the royal authority, and again, the crown got into the daily governing of the colonies. The Quebec Act of 74 extended the borders of Quebec to include most of Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Well, this area at one time was all French colonies, and the French were pretty much laissez-faire. They just did not involve themselves with the rule of the colonies. Now, all of a sudden, you had the British coming in and say, we're going to tell you what to do. And that did not set well with the colonists who were living in these areas. Well, as you can probably guess, the colonists weren't happy, and it didn't take too much of a shove to get the Lexington and Concord or the shot heard around the world. Massachusetts created provisional government. Again, Boston was the hub of this. Under the control of John Hancock, started calling for a colonial militia, the Minutemen, supposedly be ready in a minute to do battle. And then 70 Minutemen fight 700 British regulars to mark the first Battle of Revolution. And this was not unusual as the course of the Revolutionary War took place, that the Americans were vastly outnumbered, But we'll see as we look at some of the other stuff, other lectures as we go along, that these guerrilla tactics were being used quite successfully by the Americans. Here's a summary, and this will mark it for this lecture about the American Revolution, and we will see you in a little while.